Good. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure everybody's still breathing and everything like that. So thanks a lot for coming. It's great to see everyone here. So we have a real treat this afternoon. So just to let you know that you're in the presence of not only a superb business person, but actually a person from Maryland. So he's one, if you're from Maryland, he's one of you. So he's a local boy who has definitely made good. So we're looking forward to your presentation. The George Washington Leadership Series was established in 2012. Provides a terrific opportunity for our students to spend some quality time with some real key business leaders and influential people in government. If you look at your program, you'll see the distinguished leaders who have been here in the past and spoken to us. Mr. Tom Polen is the president of Global Medical Technology of the Global Medical Technology company, Becton, Dickinson and Company. To give you a little perspective on this, this is a company with $16 billion in annual revenue and 65,000 employees. Becton Dickinson is advancing the world of health by improving medical discovery, diagnostics, and the delivery of care. Tom began his career at Becton Dickinson in 1999, and that career has spanned sales, marketing, general management, and strategic planning roles. And we talked before, he's lived in Tokyo and lived in Europe, so he's a person who's been through many, many stages in his career, and I think you're going to find what he has to say is really interesting. He's been president of the BD for almost 1 year, and in that role oversees all of BD's operating segments, the medical and life sciences segments, as well as the international segment. In addition, Tom feels strongly about philanthropy and giving back. He supports Children's Tumors Foundation, as well as the associations committed to helping patients with breast cancer, and he told me that his wife is a cancer surgeon in New Jersey. So we're thrilled to have you here. So before I just turn this over, let me explain the format. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom. He has a very interesting presentation he's going to make. And then following that, he and I are going to have a dialogue. And I have some questions that I prepared, and I hope you have some questions for him. This is a rare opportunity to talk to someone who's doing what he does every single day. So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Tom Polen.
Thank you. How's everybody doing? Good? Okay. I wish I could somehow capture or bring my 11-year-old to hear those, the prelude, and then maybe they'd listen to me if they thought I had more credibility than I have at home. So what I thought I'd do this morning or this afternoon is just give a quick overview of the journey that BD's been on, and then, again, just really look forward to having an open dialogue and discussion. So hopefully you've got some questions, and if you haven't come in with questions, get the wheels turning as we go through the discussion and shoot them off at the end of my presentation, okay? So as you heard from Kurt, BD is a $16 billion company. We've got 65,000 associates around the world, about $9 billion of sales in the US, $17 billion ex-US, and that think about blood collection devices. I guarantee you if you've ever had your blood collected, it's BD product. The needles, the tubes that go in that stabilize the blood, that's all BD. Products used for cancer diagnostics, that's our flow cytometry and life science business. And then our diagnostic systems business, which is actually headquartered up in Baltimore, Maryland. That's infectious disease diagnostics. So we're the world leader in microbiology testing and testing for diseases that are associated. So for example, HPV and cervical cancer, that's caused by an infectious disease, cervical cancer is, and so we're one of the leaders in cervical cancer screening around the world. Our next business is BD Medical. That was the last business. There are often BD products. About 70% of all pumps in the US are BD pumps that are infusing medications in hospitals. The products used to prepare the drugs in the pharmacy are BD. The drugs that then go up onto the floor are BD. The catheters going in your arm, the tubing, the pumps, all of that is BD medication management. We have a large diabetes business there, so 2/3 of all diabetes patients on the planet inject themselves with BD devices, right? There's no other company that touches more diabetes patients on every corner of the world than BD. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And our last and certainly not least business is our intervention. Other products used again for disease outcomes. And so, one of the things that we're extremely passionate about, our purpose these are some of the issues that we address in healthcare, right? And so sepsis, a bloodstream infection, this is the business up in Baltimore, is the world leader in diagnosing sepsis, right? 250,000 people in the US die every year of sepsis. This is a bloodstream. The end of everything we do. And who knows who this patient is? This may be a little young for preventing her kidney from being rejected. That's our catheter. All of the products that would have been used to prepare her for surgery, to prevent an infection during surgery, would be ours. If she had mesh. Is also on narcotics, because this is our narcotic pump. And what this is actually monitoring her breathing, because there is a button somewhere, right? This is actually the button right there that says, if you feel in pain, press it, right? And so we have technologies, though, that are on Selena here, making sure, and they're monitoring her breathing rate, they're monitoring her heart rate, and if it looks like she's at risk of having an overdose from those narcotics, it shuts off the pump, right, preventing a medication error, right? This is, as I mentioned early on, how we're applying our technologies to make a difference. But I think just as this is one patient with one specific instance, talk about we've been on. First is there's this growth of mega providers, right? And so healthcare systems, particularly in the US, but it's true around the world, are merging. And so if you go back 10, 15 years ago, there's lots of independent hospitals. There's not lots of independent hospitals anymore. In fact, the top 120 integrated delivery networks, so Johns Hopkins system, for example, would be an integrated delivery network. And you've known, if you look in Maryland area, they own a lot of the hospitals, right? Innova, which is a big one in the Virginia area, is an integrated delivery network, not too far away from here. They run, as you can see, about 60% of all healthcare spend is now controlled by those top 120 systems, right? And so they're consolidating power, they're consolidating negotiations with the payers, with the insurance companies, they're consolidating purchasing with companies like us. We're not seeing quality go up when consolidation happens, but we see that as a major. The biggest way to innovate is actually not new products, it's business models, right? And you see that a lot in your daily life, right? So the biggest taxi cab company in the world doesn't actually have any taxis, right? It's Uber, right? The biggest hotel chain in the world doesn't actually own any hotels, right? Airbnb, right? The biggest retail center in the world, or in the US at least, doesn't have any stores, it's Amazon, right? And so these were all examples of business model disruption. They didn't innovate a specific product, but they disrupted the business model. And I'll talk about how we're disrupting business models in healthcare in a bit, but there's a lot of that happening that's reshaping our ecosystem. So for example, you see Amazon entering into the healthcare distribution space as an example of that. You see value-based purchasing becoming a big deal, where people are disrupting, rather than, hey, why don't you buy a product from us for $100, go ahead and use it and enjoy using it, right? People are changing that equation. They'll say, here's a product for $100, and if it doesn't work, give it back and you don't pay anything, right? You see companies in the healthcare space beginning to do that. It's disrupting the business model. Another big trend that's happening in our space is the growth of empowered. Our new digital health business unit in Boston last year, as we now have our first app on the iTunes store that we launched in the last 6 months. So this whole digital revolution is real, and it's having a big impact on the healthcare space. And then finally, chronic disease, right? And so chronic disease has been what's driving US healthcare spending for quite some time, but it's really just in the last 5 to 10 years that it's been what's driving healthcare spending now globally. So before that, if you step back 10 years ago, the number one cause of death around the world was actually infectious disease, right? And that's not a chronic disease, that's an acute disease, right? You get it, you either are gonna die or you're gonna get cured of it, but it's an acute condition. There's been a huge amount of progress, right, through areas like vaccine campaigns, implementing clean water systems throughout much of Africa or other parts of Asia, training for safe sexual practices around the world. And so you've seen the rate of infectious disease drop And at the same time, now you've seen issues like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, right? As wealth is increasing around the world, so does chronic disease. And so as we think about innovation and addressing healthcare challenges, a lot of our focus goes to how do we help prevent and solve chronic disease. And it's harder, I think, than acute disease, right? Acute disease, you can go in and vaccinate someone. Trying to change behavior, diet and exercise behavior to prevent diabetes is a lot harder than giving someone a shot, right, to prevent the measles. It's much, much more challenging to get into someone's life and change what they do on a daily basis. But it's something that everyone is focused on. The reason for that is it's unsustainable. We all hear about unsustainable healthcare costs. 84% of healthcare spend in the U.S. is on patients with chronic conditions, right? And we all hear about the aging population. We were talking about that earlier today. If you were college students, more aging population, right? And as you can see here, the stat is 73% of people over 65 years old have 2 or more chronic conditions. That's where the cost is. If you just compare that for many of the students here in the room, if you're between the ages of 20 to 40, it's about 17% of people have 2 or more chronic conditions, age 20 to 40. You can see it's 73% once you hit 65 or over, okay? So lots going on in the healthcare space, lots going on at BD. So over the last 4 years, for example, we've doubled our size. We were $8 billion 4 years ago. We're $16 billion today. We were a little under 40,000 people. We're 65,000 people here today. And we've been expanding from a company who purely just sold medical devices, fantastic, best-in-class medical devices with a lot of first-to-world innovations. But we've been transforming ourselves to a company that first was focused on broader healthcare process solutions, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute, and now into disease management solutions. So I'll talk about this journey that we've been on. So if you step back to 2013, so we were like a $7.8 billion company in 2013. And I remember I had just taken over the medical segment at the time, which was the biggest segment. We were about 4.5 of the 7-8 at the time. And we were looking at where do we go next. And I remember we kind of drew this on my board, which was, how do we think the market's going to evolve over the future? And at that point in time, we said, well, we think that the healthcare market could evolve in a couple different ways. It could become kind of the person with the biggest basket of goods to sell wins the day. Right? We saw these healthcare trends that I just talked about coming in the future. They weren't happening right then, but we recognized they were going to occur. And so we said, is BD well positioned for this? Because the BD that had won for 110 years, which is how old we are, was always based on the best product wins, right? And so if the nurse loved our catheter, then he or she was going to buy our catheter, and that's all that mattered. But we knew that that was probably not going to be true 10 years from now, right? As people started getting more into this population health, as they started driving consolidation, as they started having to invest more in digital solutions, they were probably going to be spending their money more. There's going to be more pricing pressure put on them to not just go with the product that people like the most, but to say, okay, that's good enough. I can buy a cheaper product that does the same thing, and maybe it's not yours, right? And so we said, how are we going to evolve from where we are today? And so we said, could be one-stop shop, right? So that's what happens in a Walmart. Whatever Walmart or Target offers, if that's where you go, that's what you're going to buy. And there's big distributors like Cardinal, Medline, McKesson, who maybe they could end up kind of being the winners of the future. It could be the informatics transformation. So think about laptops, right? They're pretty much commodities. Right? The pricing for laptops has plummeted over the last 5 to 10 years. There's huge informatics investments happening in healthcare. We looked and said, perhaps all the money starts going to informatics. People say, I need to fund informatics, and to do that, I'm going to start cutting all the money that I spend on medical devices because I need to put my money into the informatics space. Could happen, right? We looked and said, maybe our world won't change. The best product innovation standalone will always win. We didn't think that was the case. And then we looked at integrated process solutions, which is eventually where we ended up directing our strategy. And that was under the belief that rather than just selling a catheter and selling a dressing for the catheter and the IV tube, that we needed to say, we don't just want to look at individual products, but we want to look at the process that those products are used in. And like a manufacturing process, we wanted to create an end-to-end solution for our customers that truly gave the best outcome from a quality and from a cost perspective. And I'll give you an example of that. And so when we said integrated solutions, we said we want to continue to have the best-in-class product. That's an entry that we never want to change. We always want to have the best-in-class product. But on top of that, we want to add informatics that helps the customer understand the effectiveness of the process that those products are being used in. And then we want to make those interoperable with other parts of the healthcare system that have data flows going on to them. And so the biggest area that we looked at that in was our medication management process. And this is, you won't be able to see this, but I'll walk you through it at a high level. So for us, it was our largest market, $20 billion served market overall. And again, I was running the medical segment at the time that had all of this. And so we looked at, this is legacy BD. These are all the different steps that happen in medication management. So a doctor prescribes the drug, the pharmacy prepares the drug in a hospital, they dispense the drug up onto the ward where the patient is. They then deliver the drug, right? They prepare the patient's skin, they put in a catheter, they hook up the IV tubing, they put it to the pump, they make sure that the flow rate and that that's the right drug for the patient, and then they administer it, right? And so we looked at this, and you could see we had different pieces of the equation. We had products, these are the products that we had 4 years ago that were serving that process. They were all not smart products. So catheters are not smart, right? They don't collect data. IV tubing doesn't collect data. Flush products that you use to keep the IV line open don't collect data. And we said, we really want to rethink and redefine medication management because everyone we were competing with at that time competed with us in catheters, they competed with us in tubing, they competed with us in products because everyone competed in products. And so we said, it's not about products anymore. We're going to redefine our market space as medication management. And we want to look at this just like you would a manufacturing process and say, our goal is from the time that a physician prescribes the drug to the moment it's given to the patient, that process is as low cost and high quality as possible. And that's never going to work if in the way that the current system operates. Because a nurse would say, I like this catheter. Someone else would say, the nurse and maybe the chief technology officer would say, I like this infusion pump. Someone in the pharmacy would say, and I like this software that helps me compound and prepare the drug. But none of those systems talk to each other. And that's where all the errors happen, right? There's thousands and thousands of people every year that die in the US alone from medication errors. You hear it all the time. People get given the wrong drugs. If you've been in a hospital, it often can take hours and hours to get the drug to you, and you have interrupted therapy, right? These are all things that can be stopped and can be solved if you think about this as an end-to-end process and you have a system that talks to each other. And so we said, we want to do that, and we want to build something that we call BD Health Site that makes all of this system talk to one another. And so we went and we looked, could we build this vision ourselves? Could we put it together with a string of pearls, buy a bunch of small companies? And so in that evaluation, we identified a company called CareFusion, which was, we ended up paying $12 billion for CareFusion. They were a spin out of a company called Cardinal, a US distributor. And they had all of these orange balls here, which actually included all of the smart parts of the equation. So think smart pumps that are collecting data on what's being infused. They have smart cabinets up on the floor called Pyxis units, which is where all the medications are held that the nurses are using their fingerprints and getting the drugs from. And so this gave us all the data streams to go into HealthSite. They actually had a big data lake out of Vegas where about 70% of all US hospitals were sending all their med management data to this data lake that CareFusion owned that would allow us to now benchmark all these hospitals against each other and help understand, what's the average waste that people have? How often are nurses overriding the safety systems on the pumps so that we can help start improving the process? So one other note was, up until this point, the largest acquisition that BD had done in our 110-year history was $300 million. And so I remember the first 6 times when I went to our management committee to try to get approval for this deal, which was $12 billion, we got rejected about 6 times. So no matter what you're trying in life, and that holds true as many seniors here are thinking about, right, your job, just keep trying, right? Be resilient in it. Because I remember still at this point in time, at one point, the president of the one business, the medical systems business that was part of the med segment, we had gone in for, I think, our 6th attempt to our management committee, right? The CEO and all the top staff had been told no, and he comes in my office, a very veteran person, had been the comptroller of the company, really he came in with his head of strategy, himself, and my CFO, and he says, Tom, can we just stop trying to buy this company? And I know we think it's right, but the biggest deal we've ever done is $300 million. No one's going to allow us to do this. And the teams are getting frustrated because they know it's the right thing to do, but the company's just not going to do it. But obviously we ended up doing that. We'll talk about the outcomes of that in a moment. But the other thing that we've been doing is not only did we put together that strategy and that portfolio, we went from servicing 35% of the med management process to now having 80% with market-leading products in every single one of those categories. But since then, we've been taking all the data from this system. And really now, it's not about products anymore, and we still invest in the best-in-class products. But as the world leader in infusion pumps, you would think, if I told you where do we invest the most money in med management, we do invest in the next-gen infusion pump. But we invest a lot more money in the software that connects all these things together, right? Because now we still want to have the best infusion pump, but now we want to take all this data and make better outcomes from it, right? And so just a couple examples of that. Because we now understand and have all the products that talk to each other across this, right, we can do things like automatically manage drug inventory in a hospital. We know what's in the central pharmacy. We know what's up on the floor. We understand what drugs are at risk of being not available, could be on back order soon, and we'll go in and automatically say, you need to stop ordering this drug, you need to order more of this drug, here's how you allocate it out to the floor so that the drugs are available when the patient needs them, and that it improves cash flow also. They're not keeping excess inventory in the hospital. Other things that we can do that no one else in our industry can do because of this, things like narcotic diversion. You've heard big opioid epidemic, of course, is all over the news in the US and in other parts of the world. One big thing that happens that's very bad in hospitals, there's lots of opioids in hospitals, right? And there's lots of studies that show, unfortunately, there's a big diversion issue where doctors and nurses actually are taking them and either using them themselves, because there's morphine, et cetera, all around the institution, or they're taking them and selling them, okay? And the last thing you want is either if they're taking them and selling them, or they're using them themselves, that means they probably were prescribed for a patient, the patient's in pain and not getting it, and then you could have, of course, a healthcare worker who's high when they're supposed to be delivering care to a patient. It's a very bad thing. So, but because we understand what's happening in all of these things, our systems now, we actually just last year went and partnered with the same companies. If you've got a Visa or MasterCard, right, and sometimes you may get an email that says, did you just buy this, did you just get gas in North Dakota? No, I did not get gas in North Dakota. Maybe someone stole your credit card, right? Looking at data signals. So we have the same thing where we look at data signals across all the different pieces of the equation, from when the prescription happens to when the nurse picks it up to when it gets up onto the floor to when it gets put on the pump, and we'll start identifying signals. Why did it take 4 hours from the time the nurse took it out of the drug station to when they put it on the pump, right? Why did the vial come back weighing a lot less than the amount that they took it out of the vial, right, for example? Why is morphine being used so much higher rate in this part of the hospital than other parts of the hospital? We actually flag and will identify specific nurses that we think are a suspect for narcotic diversion. This is a big issue. Moral of the story is you can't do that unless you have systems that talk to each other, because these are different parts of the equation. And this is something that there is no other company that can do this. We have pump competitors, we have catheter competitors, we have people that compete with us on products. No one else competes with us on medication management solutions, because there's no one else with this portfolio. And because we have about 70% category share in each of those areas, right, it's a very strong position that we've built. And so redefining the spaces that you compete in, I think, is the moral of the story there. I remember when we first told this story to investors, and we spend a lot of time with investors, obviously, especially when you announce a $12 billion deal, they were skeptical, saying, okay, we understand you've redefined medication management this way. Are customers really going to buy that, right? And I think we've been really positive over the last several years, and you'll see some of the results. But that CareFusion deal was the only deal in med tech that actually accelerated revenue and beat its cost synergy goals in the last 10 years. It's done phenomenal for us. And we've grown our market share by about 2 points every year since we've put this strategy in place, and this year's no exception to that. So customers are saying, we believe in this vision, and this is where we need to head, right? And it's really standing us apart from others, because it's very, very difficult to replicate. The other thing that this big transaction did is whenever you do something big and transformational, like spending $12 billion to buy a company you haven't done in 110 years, you can use it to do a lot of other things as well. Right? One of the good things about being a 110-year-old company is you're a 110-year-old company and you've got a lot of brand equity, et cetera. The other thing is that we've been doing good for 110 years. We're one of the best performing companies, not just in healthcare, but overall. So if you want to drive change, it can be hard, right? Because when you're doing well, that's the hardest time to drive change. And we were doing pretty well before we did this acquisition. Well, bringing in 15,000 new people and the catalyst of a $12 billion deal that has to be successful, that's a good reason to drive change. And so we took advantage of that. And you can see some of the other things that this did for us. First, it gave us a catalyst to say, look, the way we've been running finance and the way we've been running HR and IT, we want to find a way to do it cheaper, right? We want to create shared service centers. We want to do these lower cost functions so that we can take that money and move it into R&D. Because at the end of the day, we're here to serve patients, and we're here to bring new medical technology innovations to improve healthcare. And spending more money for us on those internal functions like HR, like IT, like finance, they're very important, but they don't help us cure disease in patients, right? We want to spend money on R&D. And so we use this to transform our costs there. We significantly reduced our costs in those areas. We also reduced our costs in manufacturing. We consolidated 24 manufacturing plants. We integrated into others. We still have about 70 manufacturing plants around the world. We have 24 less than we had 4 years ago. We are actually one of the largest manufacturers in the U.S. still. We're a net exporter in the U.S. As I mentioned, $1 billion sales in China. We do produce about 40% of those products in China for China. The other 60%, though, come from the U.S. We're the second largest employer, for example, in Nebraska. Huge presence there. Connecticut, Baltimore, big manufacturing presence. I think we're the second largest life science company in Maryland, actually. Right next to MedImmune, who's in Gaithersburg, and then BD is the second largest employer in Maryland from a life science perspective. The other thing that we did, that we got from CareFusion, of course, and you guys would know it better than anyone, you got to be in technology to really think about thriving in the healthcare space going forward. And so CareFusion gave us about 600 software programmers. We have a big team of about 400 folks in Chandigarh, India. We've got about 200 plus in San Diego who just do software programming. We've got now a smaller team up in Boston that does digital health. These are ex-Amazon, Apple, Google folks who are doing the app development that I mentioned earlier. But we're now a digital company. We did not have a big software presence before. About 70% of all hospitals in the U.S. have our software. There's not many other companies who have that breadth of presence across our customer base. The other thing that, and I mentioned this before, when you go through a transformation like we've been on, and of course we are in healthcare, and I wouldn't want to be in any other industry than healthcare. Right? I wouldn't want to, Nike's cool, I like sports, I would never want to work for those, right? Because healthcare, you get to make an impact on patients. And again, you've got 65,000 people around the world who get pumped up about helping patients. And so, guess what? When you go and you do a $12 billion deal, it's hard, right? There's a lot of things that we promise. By the way, when we bought CareFusion, it was growing 3 to 3.5%. The reason I got rejected so many times when we presented it is because we went and said, okay, board, biggest company you bought is $300 million. I'd like you to spend $12 billion. And I know the company BD is growing 5%, and I know this company over here that I want you to spend $12 billion on is only growing 3 to 3.5. But trust me, we can run it better than that management team, and I can grow it 5 plus. That's a big stretch, right? To convince someone to do. And there's a lot of work to do it, right? There's revenue, what we call revenue synergies, which is our belief that under our management, we're going to run it better. By the way, at the end of the first year, we grew at 5%, and we've grown at least 5% every year since. So we did it. We said we were going to deliver $250 million in cost savings. We've delivered over $350 million in cost savings by bringing those two companies together. But that's not easy. So how do you get people to come to work and say, not just be nervous about the change? Because when you say cost synergies, people think job loss too, right? So people get nervous in that. Number one thing is to stay focused on what we're here to do, which is to help patients, right? And to reinforce our vision and our purpose. And so a couple things that we did to help drive that. One is I'd worked a lot with some of the professors at Harvard over the period of time. And I called up a friend of mine, Michael Beers. He's an organizational design expert at Harvard. And I said, Michael, you've written lots of Harvard case studies. I'm sure you've used some of them in your classes here. Can you help me write a case study on what we're doing here with CareFusion? And I don't want it published. It's not something to be shared externally, but I want to write a case study that we're going to pretend that the case study is written in 2020. And this is actually a picture of it. That's the Harvard logo and the case study. And it says, how BD transformed healthcare, and it's written in 2020, right? And so this was a tool that we created that we shared with all the management of the company to help them understand in 2020, this is what the company is going to look like. This is the journey that we will have just gone through as an organization. And so it helped people envision the outcomes. Why are we doing all this stuff? When we're asking people to put in the extra hours, when we're asking people to do things differently, when we're telling the HR function, we don't need HR in every little business unit around the company or in every plant. We're going to move this to shared service centers in San Antonio, Texas. These are big changes that we did. We took 400 people out of New Jersey, and we said, your jobs are going to San Antonio, right? And maybe 300 jobs are going to end in San Antonio, not all 400. And you can move there if you want, but if you don't, you're not. Cost of living's a lot lower there. We're going to pay less, but that's better. We're going to take the money we save and we're going to put it in R&D. These are tough things to do, and we did a lot of things like that. At the end of the day, this helped people understand why we're doing that, right? Because at the end of the day, we're going to make healthcare better. We're going to eliminate medication errors. We're going to make healthcare cheaper. We're going to make it safer to have care delivered. So this was a great tool. The other thing that we also did was we engaged patients with our associates. Because one of the things that you find is, certainly if you're in R&D, or if you're in sales, maybe in marketing, those are most of the groups that really get to interact with patients and our customers on a routine basis. I go out at least once a month and with our customers as well. But most of our 65,000 associates, you have to keep in mind of the 65,000, probably 40,000 of them are in manufacturing. Right? So we're a big manufacturing. We manufacture most of what we sell. We manufacture, quick nugget, we manufacture about 50 billion disposable medical devices. One of the things we always joke, we literally mold more plastic parts than Lego. Right? So we're the #1 molder of plastic parts in the world. So big manufacturing presence. But to bring that vision to life as to why we're doing what we're doing, we brought patients in. And so this is just a picture here of a patient that we brought in on the first day. This was a couple that was up on stage. We had all associates from around the world with a telecast. I was up on stage interviewing them and having a chat with Owen, who's a little kid. He was born premature several months, and those were his mom and dad who were up talking about, right, what it was like to have premature child delivered, worried. He had got sepsis during his stay in the hospital. They thought he was going to pass away. He was on a ventilator. He had multiple IV tubes going into him. And you could see in the background, that was our ventilator, that was our pump, that was our catheter. All of those products sustaining Owen's life were our products, right? And so to have his parents go up in front of our 65,000 associates and say, thank you for what you do. You saved our son's life. And that's Owen saying thank you, right, to all the associates. That's how people get jazzed to want to make a difference, right, and make an impact. Our HR leader, he also used to be a former Abercrombie & Fitch model. Our HR leader asked if he could give the presentation with his shirt off. I did say, no, that's inappropriate. But she thought that was a kick. But they were a great group, and it really, as you can see here, a quote from our associates, right? That's really what gets people excited to make a transformation like the one that we went through. And the other big part of that as well is our culture, right? And so you use a change like the one I just described to help advance our culture. We're a 110-year-old company, 115-year-old actually now, I think. Very quality focused. That's how we got to be as old as we are. All of our associates, I think, it's funny because if they go into healthcare, they're the first people to be when that doctor's not in the room. They're opening up the drawers and seeing what products the doctor's using. And if they're not using BD products, like, this doctor must suck, because they clearly don't understand quality. Our people are passionate about our products, and they are very passionate that our products are the best. And it's been that way since the inception of the company. And so that's a great strength that we have. BD stands for Becton Dickinson, right? Henry Becton, the grandson of the founder, is still on our board of directors. The Becton family still is very much involved. very much has, we're a large company, but it's a company that cares about each other. One of our cultural imperatives is help each other be great, right? That's something that we talk about a lot inside the company. Another big thing that we talk about is we do well by doing good, and we are fortunate enough to fulfill our life's work through our work life, right? We're very values-focused, we're very purpose-driven, and we do care about each other. It's a great thing of the company. But we're also that age and that size and that success. We think we're slow. At times, we thought we were slow in decision-making. We need to change that. And so we put out new aspirations. We actually started, we call it Yam Jam sessions. So Yammer is like Twitter, but for internal purposes. Not everyone can see it unless you work at the company, you can't see it. And so we started talking about, here's these new cultural imperatives. We had a number of initiatives to drive these, but it included engaging associates, talking about what's stopping us from being more nimble, what's stopping us from being more innovative. We put specific programs in place, initiatives that were driving these, but we've really seen now more lately a lot of great progress in these cultural imperatives. So what's the outcome of this? And then we'll open it up for Q&A. It's been a great 4 years, right? And so if you've been a BD shareholder, and I know there's a stock club here at Washington College, if you had owned BD stock, you would have been doing really well, right? So BD stock is up 107% over the last 4 years. That's versus 54% for the S&P 500. Two companies, number 1 and 2 for total shareholder returns over the last 4 years in med tech, BD and Bard. We just bought Bard, so in December. So we have the top 2 highest performing companies are now 1, which is something we're really excited about. I'll talk about that in just a second. You can see we moved BD's revenue growth up to 5 to 6% is the guidance that we've given this year. We've grown our operating income substantially. Over the last several years, we've expanded our operating margin over 500 basis points. We've committed to another 600 basis point improvement over the next 3 years as part of the Bard acquisition. And we've expanded our addressable markets by almost threefold, right, through the combination of the CareFusion acquisition and Bard. And as I mentioned before, this is a quote from David Lewis, who is one of the chief analysts at Morgan Stanley. So these are the people who say BD has a buy rating or a sell rating. Those are people like David Lewis, and he's probably the most respected in the industry. So you can see the quote here. The majority of large cap transformational deals over the past few years have led to underperformance to date. Only Becton outperformed after its CareFusion acquisition. So we're proud of what we did. And the other thing that we're very, very proud of is our recognition, not just on the street, but in our community. And so something that we take a lot of pride in. Fortune 2 years ago started a new list. They've always had the most admired company list, which we've been on for I don't even remember the last time we weren't on the world's most admired company list. We're on there again this year. But they started a new list called Companies That Change the World. And so we were one of only 10 companies who were on that list for 2 years in a row, the first 2 years that's been there. That's something that we're very proud of because people recognize what we're doing to change healthcare. We're also, you can see, recognition we've had on innovation around expanding access globally. We are the leaders in TB diagnostics. We're the leader in HIV diagnostics. We're one of the leaders in cervical cancer screening. Leader in vaccination, helping vaccination programs around the world. One of the big things that we did early on was one of the number 1 ways HIV was being transmitted was people were taking the same syringe and going patient to patient doing vaccinations, right? We invented the disabled syringe, so you can only inject once, and then it disables. Actually had a big impact, but that put us in contact. We work a lot with WHO, UNICEF, the Gates Foundation on technologies for the emerging markets. And obviously sustainability, 100 most sustainable companies in the world, things that we're very proud of. So that leads us to the new phase that we're on, and I won't talk about this much, but we can certainly talk about questions. So we went and we said $300 million deal. Let's go ahead and get the confidence to do $12 billion. We said, let's go do a $24 billion deal, which is what we just finished. It wasn't in the master plan when we started. CareFusion wasn't either. The other thing I'd say is none of these acquisitions, CareFusion or the more recent acquisition of Bard, came from a financial background. They all started on strategy, right? And so I remember when I was working on the Bard strategy 2 years ago, we put it I literally put it in my second drawer of my desk after we finished the strategy work, and I never presented it to our CEO at that time because I thought, you know what, I'm not going to go say, now let's go do a $24 billion deal. But as we started seeing the Bard stock price go up, and then performed very well, it was clear that if we didn't act now, their value was going to get away from us. And so we took it off and had the discussion, and we ended up doing the acquisition, actually. But it was based upon advancing our strategy. BARD really allowed us to help advance that purpose of preventing healthcare-associated infections. They gave us some other key products in that medication management continuum, and they gave us new entry into helping address critical disease management areas like surgery and like vascular disease. So that's a little bit of background on our journey, and maybe time for a dialogue.
That's great.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So that was fantastic, and you made my day, week, and year for a reason that you would never know, but I'm going to tell you now. In 1992, I recommended to the DuPont Executive Committee that they buy BD, and they turned me down.
I'm glad.
And now I know they made a huge mistake because they don't exist anymore. So I can't wait to call a few people. So that was fantastic. So I'm going to ask, I hope you folks will have some questions. This was phenomenal. Here, the question I would have for you, Tom, is remembering you're at a liberal arts college here. So when you think about people that you want to hire for this vast new empire, this is becoming one of the hugest companies. What kind of skills do you look for? What do you think about in hiring new people into your company?
Sure. It obviously varies at differing levels. Probably the number one thing is certainly problem solving is something that we look for. The experience at the end of the day, one of the things we're very focused on is trying to think outside of the box, that people don't need to have that exact specific domain experience, because it's very hard to find that in certain areas. We do want that in some cases, but we really look for problem-solving skill sets, learning agility, and where people have been able to demonstrate that in past careers. Obviously, you're not going to be a PhD biochemist without a PhD in biochemistry at BD, but when it comes to, I'd say, once you get in the company, being able to move up, we see it really based on people's strength in problem-solving and learning agility are the main things.
So an add-on question to that is, as a person who's now running a significant part of the company, when you look at people within the company, what kind of things do you look for in terms of promotability? What causes people to stand out in your mind as you think of promoting folks up through the organization?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you're not getting promoted unless you get results, right? So, I mean, number one is get results. And the fastest way to get promoted is get results, right? So I always tell people, I never have asked for a promotion. I've never applied for a job in my life, right? Once I got into the company. I mean, I applied for my first job out of college, and then a second job when I went to a startup company that we ended up, one of the first people in a startup company, we sold that to BD. That's how I went to BD. I can tell a little bit more about my career history later on. But just focus on getting things done, right? I think people that we see move up, it's just get things done. And the other thing that I see, and this varies in companies, but certainly in our culture, people who care about others, and it's not about them. Right? I normally am immediately turned off as soon as I see people about me, right? That's not something that you want to see, because it's very much a signal that they're not going to be a strong leader. People do not follow people who are me people, right? They follow people who are about the team and about others, and good things will happen to them if they just don't focus on themselves. And that's something that's always hard to understand. And it's, as a natural, even me as a leader, one of the things that people will find is, as people move up too, that their leadership style matures in the right way. Normally when you're coming, and you guys need this, as you come out of school, you do have to be focused on career, and you do have to be focused on typically a bit more aggressive and focused on, okay, what's my next role? And you see that. And then once you get to mid-management, you need to now start thinking less about that competitiveness and being able to move up in the aggressivity, and it's more about how am I bringing others along with me, how am I communicating and inspiring others, how am I discussing a vision and a journey that we're going on. And so you need to see that maturity as a leader. You also see leaders who kind of stick with that competitive me perspective and don't make the jump to the more senior level leader. Right? There is a different style that has to get used. And by the way, this senior level leaders probably wouldn't have got to the mid-level if they didn't have that competitiveness and energy and aggressivity up front to put in the time. But then the same skills that get you to the mid-management level are not going to be the skills that get you to the senior management and to the executive level. There's different skill sets that you have to learn at each phase of the way.
Yes. So before I ask you your next question, I want to talk about me for a few minutes.
Please.
As a joke. Right? Thank you, whoever just laughed. I really appreciate, thank you, Thad, I appreciate that. So, before I turn it over to hopefully the students have some questions, one of the things that I was noting in your presentation, Tom, is that more and more you see these icon companies that have been around for hundreds of years, and General Electric is the most recent example of that DuPont was an example. I mean, we could go back, and Ford and General Motors, we could go back, see these icon companies that as they age, they don't get better, they seem to move into, what is there culturally about BD that has allowed this growth to, I mean, there must be something in the ethos of the organization that allows you to have not only not gone downhill, but you've grown substantially. Is there something culturally that you can point to?
A couple things. One is, and by the way, at this point in time, I still remember a chart that we were with. So one of the things that happens when you're an executive at these types of companies, you have investment bankers coming in constantly pitching you with companies you should buy. Now, that's not how we came up with CareFusion. But they'll typically come in and say, here's who we think is going to buy who, and there's charts. And I still remember a chart that had, on the x-axis, it had a number of companies. Here's who are going to be the buyers. And on the y-axis, it said, and here's all the companies that we think will be bought over the next coming several years. And I remember seeing BD was the only company that was on the x and the y-axis 4 years ago. Because it's $7.8 billion in a consolidating industry, it wasn't clear, right? BD wasn't the $20 billion, right, or $30 billion Medtronic. It was clearly not going to, was on that x-axis. It could have gone either way. Now we are at the scale, where you're never too big to be bought, as you can see with some of the big consolidations, but it's way less likely. We're certainly only on the x-axis of that chart today. So I think, first off, there is a thing about getting to scale, and more important than ever in healthcare. Healthcare is about scale right now in our industry. Right? There's not going to be many $4 billion there's not many $4 billion companies left in our industry, and that sounds pretty big, but in healthcare it's not very big. The other thing that we believe strongly in, and is a practice that I think helps this, is we have something called constructive challenge. And it's something that we teach all of our leaders about, and it's something that we're pretty passionate about. So constructive challenge is, we do it on R&D teams, we do it on any major important project, and that's where we bring in another team that's not the one working on the problem, and their goal is to constructively challenge and beat up the other team's ideas, right? And so it's the premise that, right, I think this is where, if you look at a GE or some of the other organizations that get into trouble, it's that same management team that's looking at the same issue and they're hitting blind spots, right? Or you have a very strong leader that's one person at the top that says, here's where we're going, and they're not listening to others around them, right? Our style as leaders is, right, we don't want leaders like, I've had to let go of presidents who, when I hear people, I've heard people say, I've been in their leadership team and we're listening to them. And as soon as I hear that, ding, 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 and I start investigating more, that's not good, right? I want leaders in a room where they're doing the listening, they're not the ones doing the talking. Because if they're doing the talking all the time, that's a red flag that they're going to miss something, right? That they're going to miss feedback from the region on what's happening in the marketplace. It's about a team with the best ideas on the table. It also we're very big into diversity and inclusion, and it's about not only having the right diversity of people and thoughts in the room, but even equally and more important than that is having an inclusive environment where those ideas are heard, right? And so it's about teams being able to listen to differing points of view. And I think at the end of the day, right, some of those companies, they did get into trouble if they were, you obviously would know DuPont better than I, but if it's a bunch of 20-year vets of the chemical industry that grew up in that industry together and that's who's making all the decisions, right, I personally would not invest in that company. That's a red flag to me. We have a very diverse leadership team. We actually have won awards for the diversity of our board of directors, both from a gender and racial diversity perspective, but from a thought diversity perspective as well, from the backgrounds. And one of our board members is obviously very close to this university, Rebecca Rimmel, who lives here in Chestertown, great person, head of Pew Charitable Trust. But I think that constructive challenge and being open to other ideas is an important part of the equation.
That's very interesting. So let me open it up to you folks. It's a rare opportunity to have a chance to ask Tom questions. What would you like?
I'll say one other thing too real quick. change, right? So one thing that people, after you do these back-to-back, CareFusion and BARD, question I always get asked by associates, because there's, of course this isn't easy, right? There's layoffs that happen in the company, and we just had 2,000 people, right, laid off in the last 6 months in the company. Now, right, that's less than 10%. It's less than 5%, it's less like 2% of the company. But that's a big deal, right? That's when it's happening in a couple sites. So people get nervous. Now, again, we're doing well. That money's going back in to help us be able to succeed in other deals. But people ask, okay, when are we done changing, right? When's the change done? And my answer is, it's never going to be done, right? It's never done. Not that we're planning on doing continual layoffs and reductions, but it's explaining in this environment and in healthcare overall, unless we say everyone's healthy on the planet and our mission is done, we're not done changing, right? And so that's always going to involve us making changes to the organization to do things better. I think that's also gets to part of companies who get stagnant as they say, I'm comfortable with what we're doing, and we just keep doing the playbook, right? We're constantly looking. We're not doing it too fast, right? We're doing it in probably 5-year cycles. So we're just on our new 5-year cycle now with the BARD acquisition. We're steady as she goes. I'm very protective of starting new initiatives in the company. We don't want to be doing that because we can't be moving people all around. But we do have to recognize that it's a continuous cycle. Right?
Yeah,
Sorry.
No, thank you, Tom. Any questions for Tom? Yes, sir.
You're hiring these hard-working listeners. Do you find them in the English and history departments or the chemistry and biology departments?
We find both. Yeah, both. So our last COO, he was an English major. Bill Cozy, he just recently retired, but both. So we certainly have, and if I think about our leadership team today, it's probably half and half. Science and more liberal arts backgrounds. So I think, again, it gets down to learning agility and some of the other characteristics that I mentioned.
The old people are taking up too much time, but we lost a 2-year-old granddaughter from a medical mistake and a wrong drug being
Oh, very sorry.
initiated at, I won't mention the name, but one of the best hospitals, certainly in the country,
Yeah.
one of the best in the world, and it's not too far from here.
Yeah.
But, it's real, and our daughter, I mean, it just was awful,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, and the little girl was coming home that day. But our daughter wrote a book about this experience. It came from her journal, that was part of the therapy, and a friend read it and said, this should be a book. Anyway, it was made into a book. It is now all over the country. It's required reading for nurses. It's been translated into Japanese, and she speaks all over the country, and what you have done thrills us because it's what her focus has been. Our little granddaughter would be alive today if there was a system where the mother could press a button and get the attention of the emergency unit. And so not the BARD, but the other.
CareFusion?
The other thing where you connected.
Yes, health site.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, very obviously sorry to hear. And I'm sure your daughter, it sounds like she may know us already. I would imagine if she's in that space, she would know us.
I'm going to talk to her when I get
Yeah, maybe we could follow up offline, and that would be great to just maybe put us in contact if there's anything we can do to get her insights into what we're doing.
The book is Josie King. It was the granddaughter that died, and our daughter is Geroge King, lives in Baltimore. So I'll see that.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up afterwards.
Okay. So we have time for one more question. Come over here.
What would you say is the biggest challenge facing BD in staying competitive against companies like Medtronic and J&J?
Well, first off, we need to finish number one challenge is making sure we execute on our strategy, especially when you do a $24 billion acquisition, you commit the cost and revenue synergies that we need to make happen. So that's number one right now, while sustaining your core business performance. J&J I don't really view as a competitor directly. Medtronic, we compete in just a very narrow space, primarily hernia and peripheral vascular treatment. And for us, it's about keeping nimble businesses that innovate faster than they do. So for example, the number one space we compete with Medtronic on is drug-coated balloons. So imagine balloons that if you have a block in your blood flow block in your leg, the risk is either you're going to get your foot cut off, or they're going to put a balloon in your leg and open up the vasculature so that blood can flow through. We innovate faster than Medtronic. We have a team. Actually, I fly out later this week to Arizona, where we'll be meeting with that team. They wake up every day and they just innovate drug-coated balloons, and they're able to do so faster. We're going to be the first company to have a claim for below the knee opening up, which is the number one area for diabetes patients where people are getting amputations. We will have new technology that no one does, and we will literally save limbs, of thousands of people around the country. And we'll be the first company to do that. We're probably 3 years ahead of Medtronic in that space. Why are we 3 years ahead? Because we have a team that just wakes up and that's all they do every single day. So keeping that focus is something we really believe in. We structure our organization in business units, and those business units, right, so like the group in Baltimore, they just do infectious disease diagnostics. And that team, right, they're all they do is wake up and they're that Baltimore team that just does infectious disease diagnostics. They don't get caught up in all the other stuff that I talked about. Actually, one of the challenges is keeping them in the loop on what else is happening in the company. But at the same time, we want them to stay very focused. And we actually like the geographic separation often of keeping them away from New Jersey, which is the corporate headquarters, and staying out where they can just do their thing every day, right?
So Tom, let me ask you one final question, because I'm finding, so obviously you love what you do. What would you say to our students? How does a person like you, with your massive responsibility, 65,000 employees, global enterprises, multiple divisions, what do you do to maintain some life balance? How do you make sure that you have other things in your life other than just work?
So you have to be very purposeful in it, just like you are purposeful in your work. So I have 3 personal goals, and I spend time every New Year's rethinking those. If you go in my closet, I have those 3 goals. I read them every morning, right? It's be the best father and husband I can. There's goals around personal fitness and wellness, and there's goals around leadership. And what you won't find me is I don't play golf. I don't go hang out with buddies very often. My friends are at work for the most part. It's not important to me. I do donate to certain charities, but I don't spend a lot of other time in the community, other than ones associated with, for example, my kids' school that we were talking about earlier on. I've got 3 kids, ages 11 to 13. But you'll find me leaving work early and going to tennis matches last week, or my daughter's softball game. I don't get to make every game, but certainly if it's a weekend I do. Midday I don't, but I commit to make at least 3 games per season, even right after work, and I just get those on the schedule early on. Weekends I turn off when the kids are awake. I may turn the computer back on in the evening. You're never off. I'll check stuff in the morning and then in the evening. There are exceptions to that. I try to avoid travel on the weekend like the plague. And then I do a lot of competitive, like trail running, CrossFit, and other things. I'll exercise 6 days a week. I think that's really important, wellness, to keeping up your energy level. I think it's really hard to run at that pace if you're not keeping yourself well, eating well, and being healthy. And so getting competitive events on the calendar. And I wrote I've got a guy picking me up when we're in Arizona at 4:30 for a 4:30 CrossFit session with our VP of R&D out there. So I don't know if that was a good idea for me to share my love of CrossFit with him, but we'll bring in, I've got a 24-hour endurance event we're doing this summer with a couple of folks from BD that are passionate about that stuff too, but I think that's keeping all those 3 balanced. I see them symbiotic with each other, right? But know what you want to do. You got to be purposeful about it. If you're not purposeful about it and schedule it and plan it just like you would a business event, it's not going to happen. Right? You're not going to go exercise. You're not going to make your kids' events. You're not going to be the best business person unless you're purposeful about all of them.
That's fair. And you also, you just exude the love of what you do, which is amazing. The thing I loved about your presentation, you're talking about the fact that what brings you to work every day is that you know that you're going to do something to help other human beings. It's an extraordinary thing that you just said. So wasn't this a fantastic presentation? Let's give Thank you so much. Okay, so Mr. Polen is going to stay. Can you stay for about a half hour? So we have a little reception back here, and Mr. Polen will be there. We have